So what we're doing here, and we're super grateful that you've joined this panel, because we're here to talk about the emergence of innovative new technologies in the world of sports, which we all live, and how you guys, the leaders in this space, are using this tech to get the most out of your athletes. In particular, we're going to be talking about these reactive agility lights that we had mentioned, that being BlazePod. And we've been laden with new technology and information in the last decade. And now what's come to my doorstep are these little reactive agility lights, or as they call them, pods. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, and how this type of tech is helping to advance what you guys do every single day.
My name's Josh Ewens. I'm the first team fitness coach here at West Ham. We've used BlazePods in a few different ways, and that's changed over time as we've become more familiar with the technology. Everything from helping the players to work at home away from the training ground via the app, and how easy it is for them to use there, and also keeping engagement and stimulating maximal intent in what they're doing in group work, keeping it different. The rehab process is always it's also been really helpful for.
I'm Jo Canales. I'm a performance coach for football players like from the national team, like Miguel Ayun or Gonzalez, and also Formula One driver Checo Perez. And I've been using the BlazePod mainly as a pre-competition reaction in activation drills and coordination.
My name is Dr. Daniel Laby. I'm a sports vision ophthalmologist with 30 years experience working with elite professional Olympic level athletes across all sports. We've used the BlazePods in two different ways. One way is to measure abilities, to stratify players' abilities against each other, against their team, against their sport, what they need to perform. And then certainly use it as a training technique in order to improve someone's deficiencies in those areas, reaction areas, decision-making areas related to reaction that they need to perform optimally in sports.
I'm Bill Burgos. I'm the head of strength conditioning for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I've been in the NBA for about 16 years. We use BlazePod. One is to improve response time and just to excite the nervous system pre-competitively.
So how have you been able to effectuate and organize and manage your team's fitness in this COVID environment, in this Omicron environment, and the follow-up question will be, how has BlazePod helped with this?
Yeah, a very topical question. I think particularly in the first instance of lockdown, so we're talking about March, a couple of years back now, in England anyway. We'd never seen anything like it, as most people hadn't. And my first thought with the sudden lockdown, and that was us as well. So the Premier League shut down, all players and staff had to work from home. So there was a busy 2 days of getting everyone gym equipment sent out, getting everyone loaded up with weights and watt bikes and treadmills and everything you could imagine. At that time, we were allowed an hour outside individually, and obviously get programs and everything sorted out and sent through to the players. It was a really challenging time. It's certainly a time that I probably learned a huge amount from. And I think the most difficult thing about it, I'm sure everyone on this panel would have found a similar thing, is that as the weeks went on, we had no definite time as to when we were coming out. So you talk about programming and S&C and conditioning, and it's all, what's the next thing you're working towards? How are you periodizing? When's the next competition period? When was the last one? And this was a period of time where there was no answers to any of those questions. So keeping players interested, keeping them focused, keeping elements of competition and variation in what they were doing was key, absolutely key. And that was where I had to be as creative as possible. And BlazePods in that instance, we just got involved with. So it was a case of me getting to understand how it worked and what it was very quickly. And certainly it was helpful in, listen, you can do a lot of different types of athletic training without BlazePods. But the one thing that the players couldn't do from home, from their front rooms, from their gardens, was big elements of cognitive load, lots of reactive drills. So it was certainly a useful thing for a few of the players in particular to start adding elements of reactivity and perceptual cognitive training into what they were doing, as opposed to just your traditional strength and conditioning training. So that was very useful, certainly.
Right along with Josh's point of keeping people interested in your mental health point, we had the opportunity to work with one of Josh's opponents, Trent Alexander-Arnold, last spring, starting in January through April, right in the meat of the pandemic. And we were able to, I think, keep him pretty interested. If you take a look at the Red Bull movie that was produced online, by a varied number of interventions to both test his visual abilities and train and improve them, including BlazePods. There were a whole bunch of BlazePod different activities and tests we put him through. And then we went to some virtual reality things. We had him using equipment that he'd never seen before. So keeping the players interested is a critical piece to advancement and performance. And I think the lockdown gave us opportunity to do that, gave us opportunity to kind of have some time with a top-notch player and challenge him to the limits using the most modern technology available, which frankly 30 years when I started this didn't exist. There was none of this stuff 30 years ago. There was no analytics, there was no equipment, there was nothing. So I think the lockdown, was a challenge to everybody, but allowed the, innovation, which I think we're going to find is going to be beneficial to us in the years to come.
I think it's interesting what you were saying earlier about how during the pandemic you got a chance to, get the BlazePods out to certain guys. And so I'm thinking this is a great opportunity for me going into my next off season where I can have the BlazePods to my guys, regardless if it was a pandemic or not. It's a good opportunity for them now to just be able to, do a lot of the reactive training when they're not with me. So it's nice to hear that you sent them out because of the pandemic, but do you plan on using that now, moving forward? Are the guys being receptive to that?
You know what, the interesting thing for me is I think the way, having used them in that way then, the way that I'm using them currently is a little bit different, I guess. I'm using them at the moment, listen, in the Premier League, and it'll be same in most leagues, in most sports. It's relentless in terms of the amount of games that you play and in terms of the amount of days that you're in. You easily go 3-4 weeks without a day off, and you're either in at the training ground or at a stadium every day. And my voice annoys me, let alone the players, So the way I've been using them more recently is with the group and in general, and using them to spice up what we're doing. Listen, there's loads of different things that players can react to in drills. There's loads of different things that you can do to challenge them mentally. But bright colors and good looking technology and something that's a bit new in a new setting has been working really, really well. That and in the rehab process. So the rehab process, I've always been really interested in perceptual cognitive skills, in skill acquisition, in perception action coupling, and all these concepts. And for me, it helps to bridge a gap between on the pitch training, where you're reacting to real-time information from your opponents and from your teammates and from where the ball is, and all of the development that goes with that. But also prior to being in that environment, in the rehab process, being able to add in bits of uncertainty, bits of unanticipated movements, chaos into what they're doing, to sort of bridge that gap between one and the other,
How has bringing something like BlazePod and this combining of the cognitive and physical, has it been a difficult integration into a sport as old as basketball?
No, I don't think it's been difficult at all, in terms of including BlazePod into our program, especially our pregame warm-ups. Every now and then we'll have it on the court pregame, focusing on certain guys that need to improve their neurocognitive approach when it comes to training and performance. But I just think because, we add so much other technology, it's nothing foreign to them. So if we add something like that, we know it's there to make them better. And so I think the key thing is educating the players a lot about it. And of course, creating that relationship helps with that buy-in. But, I want to agree. Of course, I forgot who mentioned it, but 30 years ago, of course, a lot of this didn't exist in terms of technology. But I think a lot of the things that we do apply now, it was there, but we just didn't have the technology per se to help enhance it, such as the BlazePod or anything. We were mostly pointing or are just shouting directions and things like that. This just makes it easier for the coach. And then we could collect data per se, and we can see how much they can improve. Because my biggest thing is I want to improve response time. I want to improve how they gather the information. I want to see what's happening during that time, and that's what I guess technology has improved on in terms of, we could look back and see, look at this historical data and see if they improve, or two, what can we do differently within the program to make them better. But it hasn't been challenging at all to include it. It's never been a problem for me. Every year I'm always adding something. They know that, there's always going to be some form of technology included into the strength program. And plus we make it a part of training. So they expect those kind of things.
Having this technology helps us a lot to bring out of the pitch or out of the court the stimulus to have the competition going. Because when you used to do this kind of drills without the pods, I don't know, with using cones or balls or anything with colors, you have to move yourself around and do things that they can look at it and they know what's going on. But with the pods, you take this like improvisation and randomness to the stimulus that helps them to get it as they get it when they're competing, because they don't know what's going on, which light will pop up and what's going to happen. So you get to have that reaction drill that you get only when you're competing. And I think that would have done the BlazePod for us to try to make it like a simulation of those reactions without them knowing what we're doing. So I've been using it a lot I started using it with a goalkeeper, and then of course with Checo, the Formula One driver, because it makes a lot of sense of trying to do what they are going to do after we use the pods. So for me, I think this technology just get us closer to improve our reaction before going and competing.
Yeah, I have to agree with you because competition, these guys are very competitive and we want to get the most out of them. And so I think BlazePod, just using that reactive lights and things like that, it makes it fun. So pre-games, we have several sets. So we will use some on the court, but then behind the scenes, in the training room, in the weight room, while they do their activation, and we do some jumps with them and some force plays, and we try to put them in a little fatigue state. So then we get them into these reactive drills. But they have so much fun with it, and because they just want to keep getting better. And we feel like when they're fun and they're competing, they're more engaged, and we get the best out of them.
I wanted to say on that too. Like now, so I'm going into my NFL offseason, and the guys that have been playing have been watching what we've been doing with BlazePod with all the other sports or the general pop. And so they're like, what are these lights? Like they got a chance to use them just a little bit before they went into the season. And now they're coming back and they're like, why is his score so high? What drill is that? So now they're all competing and trying to get the highest score on the wall, the intelligence wall. And now I'm creating all these newer drills. And they're like, man, I want to try that against this DB. Or I know Odell's going to have a high score here, but I know I can beat him. So what the lights are doing for me is getting actually more people involved in the training and trying to compete against themselves, but actually like against the people they're going to play against during the season. So it's coming together pretty well.
I think one of the key pieces here is the technology has given us the ability to have reliable data and repeatable data. I think that's a key component, because if we're going to compare someone's ability to advance or compare somebody to another player, we have to have a test that's reliable and repeatable. It can't be something that changes based on the test itself. The ability to do that, along with the ability to analyze the data, the big data picture, if you will, across teams and across single teams within a team or outside of a team, allows us to make connections between that skill and on-field performance. Because the truth is, all of this is related to on-field performance. If we do a drill that doesn't help them play better, perform better in their sport, we're wasting our time and frankly their time that could be used for something more productive. So the ability to have a system that gives us data that's reproducible, repeatable, accurate data that we can then use to connect to on-field performance metrics. Like, for example, we published some papers about some of these vision drills, cognitive vision drills, reaction drills related to baseball batting, for example. if we can do that, then we have something that's truly valuable and truly helpful to our players, as opposed to something that we just think might be helpful. I think that's something that these systems give us that we didn't have before.
Jamal, I'm gonna stick with you here because you're working with one of the best hand-eye coordinated athletes on the planet, who, made that insane catch, and all of a sudden his stock blew up to bazillions, right? Like, everyone knew OBJ after that catch. You've been working with him prior to that. You've been working with him afterward, and now that young man's on the way to Super Bowl. So you talked about everyone wanting to beat the Odell's score and what it is, but when you look at someone who has a dynamic personality, who's kind of bigger than life, how do you keep someone like that engaged?
Like a lot of the coaches have been saying, it's like bringing new technology or new drills, or just different type of ways to keep the client engaged every year. So with that being said, though, it's like a little bit of yes and no. Like, I've been able to keep foundational cone drills, functional strength, triple extension movements, like the basic stuff that these guys need, on top of every now and then sprinkling in just a little bit of BlazePod or something that can like challenge their mind. So with Odell in particular, I mean, half of these guys have like, I call it ADHD, you know what I mean? Like athletic ADHD, where they're like kids, they just need stimulants, right? And so, like I was telling you this past weekend at the conference, like, he just comes in just to do the BlazePods just because he wants to get fired up. And I'll strap a resistance band up to him, and I'll start doing some overspeed work and, some lateral movement drills. And he's like, let's just do it with the lights. That way I don't have to really think too much. It does it for me. I can just react off the lights. And, prior to this, the past 5, 6, 7 years, it's been, like he said, me calling out cones or numbers or cues for him to like think about stuff. But now I can also do that on top of the lights. So I'm adding an extra component.
So you set up in your facility something that's called they're calling it the reactive, the reactive intelligence wall.
Correct.
Can you explain a little bit more about what the reactive intelligence wall is?
Well, so it's 6 pods. They're strategically placed in different, and there's 2 on the top, 2 in the middle, about eye level, shoulder level for most people. And then there's 2 at the bottom, close to like their knees. So what they have to do is, we'll have 3 or 4 different settings, right? We'll have a setting where they have to kind of just hit as many as they can in 30 seconds. And average time, or I guess you could say rep count, would be about 60 reps for most professional athletes. The high school kids and college kids are getting 40 and 50s. And then even our female athletes are getting in those high 45 and 50 rep counts. So like a guy like Odell, who's coming in with no warm up and just literally fresh out of his car, he's coming in knocking out 64, 65, 61. And we're just like, dude, like, it took me a week to get to that. So then we throw in a couple, distracting colors, and I'm calling them safeties and linebackers. And he's got to like pay attention to what's going on the field, let alone where the ball's coming. And I'm throwing tennis balls at him while I'm doing the reactive wall. Like, we're doing a lot of different things with it. And it literally, I have them today at 6 o'clock and then Von Miller at 7. And the first thing they said is like, just turn the lights on. Just let me warm up with the lights. So it's kind of cool to hear that, because he's never said, let me warm up with the cones, or let me warm up with the light. He's like, let me warm up with the lights.
So we got to know, what's your score?
My score?
Yeah.
I just got a 64.
So you guys are tied right now?
Yeah, so we're going neck and neck right now. I'm going to try to get some content for you tonight.
I love
it. When can we go and try to break it?
Come on, I'll see you this weekend. Super Bowl's coming up.
Right. Okay.
Your focus is on vision. Can you kind of just walk us through a little bit of what you do with some of these teams and how that's, and when you call vision? I've talked to a lot of professionals who talk about vision training. I know Mal has a Vision Wednesday. How do you define vision, and how are you using it with some of the teams that are bringing you in?
Oh, thanks. Great to be here. I'm being an ex-Harvard professor, I'm gonna give a little bit of structure to some of the things. Jamal's wall actually is a proactive test and a go/no-go test, is what he's doing with the players there. And there certainly is an element of training, and I think you guys are going to be neck and neck between OBJ and yourself, because the more you guys do it, the faster you're going to get, and you can just be neck and neck all the way up there. But the approach we're taking and we've used for the 30 years in sports across the spectrum, from NFL, 3 NBA teams, NHL players, many MLB teams, some Premier League work, as I mentioned. I've been to 2 Olympics, Beijing and Tokyo, with teams, and so wide spectrum of sports. And I've published a lot about the experience with that in the medical literature. And the idea is to see, to decide, and to react. That's the basic foundation. I think everyone agrees on that. It's hard to make a decision if you can't see something properly, and you're certainly not going to react efficiently if you're not able to see it properly. And I know of no sports that are played with one's eyes closed. So there's no question that visual information is the beginning of this process. And we work in a pyramid type of fashion where we want to make sure the vision in each eye is optimal, then both eyes together. And then the decision-making process is what it needs to be. And then that decision can lead to a visually guided motor action that's efficient, obviously timely and quick. And the BlazePods kind of fit into that area there. But we want to make sure each of those levels is optimal, because there's no doubt that if any lower level that's other things are dependent on isn't 100%, we won't have maximal efficiency and maximal performance. And that's sort of the approach we take. So we're looking at all of those aspects. I probably am working with, I'm going to say, probably between 800 and 1,000 professional athletes a year that I test, evaluate, train, and so forth. Some need more, some needs less, some just are screened and do well. And we look at it in the scientific approach, where how is someone's performance on each of these different levels comparing to the average for their sport at the professional level. Unfortunately, about 30 years ago, there was nothing. Fortunately, over the last 30 years, we've gotten some normative values in terms of vision, in terms of decision-making, in terms of reactions. The hitting 60 lights in 30 seconds, that's like a 500 millisecond reaction time. And that's not too bad, especially because this is we call it complex reaction time, where you have 1 of 6 lights lighting up. You don't know which one. We've shown correlations. We've published correlation between a test like that and baseball batting performance in professional athletes. We've shown visual connections to performance on the field in baseball athletes. We've shown in our Olympic papers about differences in visual abilities between different athletes, from boxers to archers to to track and field to softball and so forth, even to USA Soccer that we worked with in terms of their visual abilities and so forth. And so all of these sports have a different visual profile, and you have to really understand what that profile of vision and performance and decision-making is for the athletes you're working on in order to serve them optimally to improve the best. What Bill works on in basketball is going to be very different than what a football player is going to need, or a soccer player, excuse the term, is going to need, or a race car driver is going to need. Those are all different. I've seen each of those athletes on the professional level, and each one needs a different level of intervention. And if someone's doing well, we don't do anything. We have them work in other areas. But if there's a deficiency, we definitely want to correct it. So that's the approach.
Dr. Lee, I don't know if you remember, we met each other. It was years ago. It was
the Knicks, right?
It was the playoffs, and I think you were testing the Houston Astros at that time.
Yeah.
And that's how we met. I remember you. So I've been, ever since then, I've really been on the reactive kick and looking at plenty of studies and things like that to improve in that area. But one of the things that really stuck with me throughout this time, because I have players coming from everywhere, right? So what I learned was, and correct me if I'm wrong, depending on the athlete's educational background could also influence their reactive ability because of the way they process the information. And so one of the things I've noticed was guys who had poor educational backgrounds, I kind of, what are your thoughts on it? I'm just keen to hear more about that.
Yeah, in terms of reaction time and reaction ability, there's lots of factors that are involved there. Besides, as you mentioned, educational background, socioeconomic background, sleep will play, havoc on this sort of thing. To tell you the truth, attitude and interest will play amazing havoc on this sort of measurement. As a coach, we often try to stimulate the athlete to perform at their best, but that may not be the best approach. Maybe the better approach is to have them do it themselves and see if they're self-stimulating and self-motivating, because you're not going to be on the field or the pitch with them telling them what to do or to get them interested. But we found, for example, I'll give you the example in terms of vision testing, which has our vision test is a little different than the usual vision test, has an element of the educational and socioeconomic background. we found with the vision test, when we test players from Dominican Republic, specifically, not so much in Puerto Rico, but Dominican Republic, that they do terribly on this vision test. And then we go through all different evaluations. We find there's nothing wrong with them. So why did they do terribly? Frankly, we don't know. We thought maybe it was language. Dominican Spanish is different than, Guadalajara Spanish. But we had native Dominican, people explaining the test to them. We had them practice the test. Doesn't make a difference. We had to make the test much shorter, by about over 50% shorter. And that seems to now give us a better ability to really say if someone passes or fails. And so there are many factors that go into someone's ability to react. And what it really means is we have an added responsibility to come up with a test that's going to be appropriate for their background. That's not going to measure their background. It's going to measure their actual ability, and it's going to train their actual ability. And it's a tough one because I think everyone's different. And as we found, Dominican people are different than, we had a South Korean team, professional team we took care of, and they had a different challenge with them in terms of how to do the testing and what to do. So there's no question about that. And that's important in the literature. When we compare results from different players, we put a team together. The team has players from all over the world. Most professional teams have players from all over. And we kind of homogenize them into one when in fact they could be different. And we should maybe look at them from their background position as opposed to their team position or their level in the sports position. But that's a great question, and it's a constant challenge.
Yeah, because I had one guy who had a physics degree, slow feet, but he was quick to respond. And then I had another guy who came from Europe, never went to college, and his mindset was a little bit different. He had quick feet, but he was slow to respond. And that's where the whole process of information was started making me think. And so we have a player development director that works on this process, stuff, whether it's language, whatever it is they need to improve on. And then we have a mental performance coach, and they just spend a little bit more time with that mental performance coach. And I mean, we didn't do a research study, but we believe that because they spent more time with the mental coach, that they were able to improve in that area.
Well, practice is always going to improve, right? If you do the task and you repeat it and you get more education in doing the task, you're going to get better. But I think we have to find tasks that are bland, that are not affected by these background things. They're very basic in terms of what we're looking to evaluate. In other words, we can do a skill that's very similar to what they're doing on the pitch or on the court or on the ice or on the field, and that's going to have lots of pieces coming into it. Or we can look at something in a different situation that's very specific as their ability to just do that. And that may be less affected by other factors than the more general practice regimen.
I'd love to, if I can, just get Daniel and Bill's thoughts in particular on something closely related to that. So, Bill, you're saying you noticed a difference between players' educational background and actually how physiologically quick they were in terms of action. And one thing that I think that we've noticed is the players who are, when you put them through the speed gates, when you put them through acceleration tests, when you put them through any pre-planned power or speed drill, the players that are fastest through that are often the slowest at the reaction element of other tasks, right? So there's this trade-off, as if you are really quick and really fast, you've not had to develop really quick reaction times to compete on the same level as other players who are physiologically, in terms of their speed and power, nowhere near what they are, but have unbelievable reaction and decision-making qualities. And it's like in a game sport like football, where there's so many variables and so much going on, and you have such a range of skill sets in different players in different positions with different strengths and weaknesses. I think that I've seen this trade-off between, as they've developed and become professional, they've not, if they've not needed to, they've not developed that to its best. And that might be a little window of opportunity to further improve those players,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it would be interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. It would be interesting to define in which of your players that kind of compensation is going on, because it made total sense for me what you said, Josh. When you have maybe a faster athlete, he doesn't need to react as fast as one who's not physically fast as he is or doesn't have the speed. So he naturally developed this quicker reaction. And then if you find out that, you can improve something that maybe you weren't aware of, and you can get those improvements, because we know that in the level that our athletes are, the improvement is really hard to get, but also 1%, it's a lot when they're competing. So it makes a lot of sense to try to recognize that in what you're doing, and also trying to put those kind of drills and reactions as close as the reality. So for me, working with drivers and football players, all the drills have to change completely, because with Checo, for example, we try to make these reactions when he jumps out of the car, when we're training in the karts, and he will leave his helmet on with the visor closed. And I'll try to put all the pods in a wider but smaller area, which is the only area he will be looking at inside the car. And for the goalkeeper, instead that he will have to cover all the box, I'll try to get them in the area he's supposed to move on. But what I find out that they get a better improvement is when I get them to the reaction straight out from fatigue. So Checo's example is right out of the car, and with Hugo, one of the goalkeepers, is we try to make some strength and power drills, and then right after that, go to the reaction and try to move as fast as possible while your legs are fatigued, and then try to improve that when you're not in your optimal condition.
I think from my perspective, it's almost kind of the complete opposite, but not. When I say that, what I mean is there are sports that we play, like football, American football, and there's different positions. And within the positions, there's somewhat of a more, organized level of competition. Like the quarterback usually has gone through quarterback training since the age of 6. And so their level of training is a little different than some of my running backs and receivers. And from an economical standpoint, a lot of these guys have grown up in, very deprived cities or neighborhoods, and they haven't had these resources. But depending on the position that they play, the quarterback has still had that a little bit of a higher level of accessibility to certain forms of training or coaching. And so these guys that come in the gym and they get on the wall, and, the quarterbacks are like, man, I would think that the quarterback would be it would be easier for them because of how much money has been invested into them, how much training has been invested to them, the level of detail, and obviously the position that they play. But you get a guy who's fresh out the street, who grew up with nothing, and he's a running back, and he's like, this is a game to me. He's used to just playing in the street with a can or barely having a basketball to dribble, and he's like, this is just fun. So the way he interprets the wall compared to my quarterback, who's like, I need to attack this like it's the game, it's X's and O's, it's numbers, compared to somebody who just didn't have anything growing up and is like, I need to beat this score so I can feed my family, is completely different from, what I've seen with, the field drills where they have to make a lateral movement to get placement to touch the light. And it has nothing to do with their intelligence level on how to move. It's just basically, I need to feed my daughter, so I need to do this drill as fast as I can.
I think that's the motivation part of it, for sure. But I think the important thing that I think Josh is picking up is the importance of having very specific evaluations that look at very specific skills. And if somebody is really good in one, that could compensate for a deficiency in another and get someone to a certain level. It may not be the professional level, it may get them through schooling and so forth, but you want to really be good at all the levels so that when you get to the competition that's really going to be competitive, you have skills to compete. I can tell you that in baseball, I get asked by teams every year to look at players' vision in terms of drafting players. And we get someone who has a bad vision test, and they say, well, should we not take this guy? I just had a call yesterday about someone like that. Should we not take this guy? And my answer to them is, I would think the opposite. If you all feel he plays well in his sport, here you may have an opportunity by fixing this deficiency to make him even better where no one else knows that. And you're now getting, I call it diamond in the rough, I call it. Somebody who could be a star now that you've identified that. So it's not a negative, it may be a positive for you and for the player. And so having very specific tests that can look at each of the components required for whatever the sport is to perform is really the optimal approach, I think, for benefit of everyone.
Interesting. That idea of spotting potential would be, incredibly useful, obviously in the Premier League as well, where you've got the big 3 or 4 clubs who can pay to get the players that are optimal in all areas, and then you've got the clubs below who can't afford that, and they're looking for the diamonds. They're looking for the diamonds in the rough, the players who you spot as having high potential in any way. If you can objectify or measure that in any way, whether it's the visual side of it or whatever, then it's absolute. It's gold dust, isn't it?
Well, if you look at Trent Alexander-Arnold, no one would have said he has any vision problems. Before last January when we started with him, he was playing very well. There's no question about that. But as our testing showed, he did have some areas that needed improvement. We improved those areas, and I think it may be a good argument to say that since the spring, his performance might be better than it was in his previous time. Now, is it due to only the work we did? I'm not going to say it is, because there's experience involved. There's many factors involved. But I don't think what we did hurt him. And he's actually mentioned in the press in the UK that his vision has improved since we've done this work together. So I think the idea is to identify deficiencies, and no matter what the sport, maximize every area required to build to the next level. One of those areas is their reaction time, hand-eye coordination, discrimination, go, no-go, reaction. You can call it whatever you want. There's many different tests for each of those things. They're very specific. Maximize it all to the level you need to perform at the professional level. And I think we have the best player at that point. That their talent then is what's the factor of differentiating ones.
So the question I have is, when we look at this reaction type training, we look at BlazePod, these are all kind of like, the idea is relevance, right? I think the theory is like ecological design. We've talked about these, it has to be open skill, it has to be novel, and there's an increased skill set in learning and difficulty. All of this shows me that there might be some neurological fatigue eventually coming on these players. So my question is, very broadly, very, very analog, how much is too much, right? When do we know when that player might be getting a little bit too much of this stimulus that it might start having that performance dip? Any thoughts there?
I'm certainly not the best person on this call to answer this question, but the interesting thing for me is how much is too much is one question. The other question is, look, experience in playing the sport you're playing, real time, whether that's a training game or a competitive game, is going to be training all of these things, right? Your perception, your information, scanning, your ability to make decisions, whether they're wrong or right in the moment, and to do that quickly. I think where this is particularly useful, and I don't know if this answers your question or not, is that they can only do that. You can only do that tough physical task for a certain amount of time in the day, right? That's the thing that's particularly limited for me. You can't train for 6 hours, games and scenarios. You can't do it. And that's where, when you're looking for those extra percentages, this sort of technology or research or these sorts of types of training can really become useful. It's to stop doing too much of the actual training in terms of the 90-minute sessions that they'll do every day or whatever. It's to stop overdoing that, but still develop these qualities that we know differentiates between top elite performers and sub-elite performers.
To me, the idea is to think about deficiency and enhancement. And for that, you need to know what the expected level of performance any test is. And so if you have someone who has deficiency, is not performing at the elite level for what they're trying to perform in their sport, we have deficiency, and that requires a whole lot of training. Obviously planned out that it's not fatiguing, but planned out that it's actually improving. On the flip side, if you have someone who's able to perform with this skill at that level for their sport, are we going to gain more by further training that skill to be even better? And the question is, that's an open question, to tell you the truth. We have some evidence about training and deficiency will improve performance. We have less good information. I just published a paper this summer about this, about training someone who's already good to be even better at a skill, whether it's how fast you hit the board, 64 lights, 65 lights, 70 lights, is that going to make you a better performer in your sport or not? And if the answer is no, then we're not really serving the athlete ideally by having them constantly train something that's not going to help them further. And so I think that's an important kind of distinction to make when we're training. And obviously you can't fatigue someone because their interest, their ability, physical ability and mental ability will not be enough to give them benefit from what they're doing. But you certainly can space out training over several months for many of these skills to get to that average level pretty efficiently without much fatigue.
But guys, I can't thank you enough. I wish we could do this every month and just talk about kind of a round table thing, but I don't know that maybe I'll email you guys personally. We can just throw ideas around because I got a lot out of it. My head's always in different sports and different realms, and you guys are kind of in these focused areas, which I think is really cool. It's just really great to meet you. On behalf of BlazePod, just thank you so much for everything you do to support the cause and support them. It's a new company. It's just been in the U.S. not very long now, from Israel, and so just they're excited that you guys are part of the team and spent the time with us this morning.